They chose the winter solstice as the birth of Jesus Christ, the Savior, the Son of Man, the righteousness, the light. December 25th is not his real date of birth. Pagan holidays disguised, but they came first. The reason for establishing December 25th is simple, really pay attention as I explained it in the gif. The customs rooted in the celebration, all the gifts and fun are really rituals to celebrate the rebirth of the sun. 4,000 years ago, millennia, the two before Messiah. 25th was for the sun god, and festival of fire was the same for the Romans. Zoroastrianism, Mithra, when the days began to lengthen and the night shorten, etc. The New Testament, it never states the year that he was born. Sacred oaks for the Germanic people, trees take on new forms, adorn the evergreen, the representation of all fertility. Kris Kringle's supernatural gift, given abilities. A poppycock, goodies left aside, a pagan bloody sock was prophesied in Malachi chapter 4 verse 2 is a shock. The sun they always talk about's the one that rise above us, not the one that came about as a product of two lovers. The merging of belief started with Emperor Constantine, the Edict of Toleration in AD 313. Our favorite morbidly obese trespassers been retouched. Sinterklaas was his real name to the Dutch. The seduction of the church, gradually the customs adopted on Saturn. Everything Julius first concocted was to make it as painless as possible for the heathens. Pagan Romans who celebrate solstices and the seasons would adapt to Christianity. Went down without a hitch, proclaimed the same feast on same day, so people didn't bitch, they had to switch. But they kept tradition same, so shit was cool. The wheel, pagan symbol for sun, the word Yule. Mistletoe itself was considered a sacred plant, the incomparable birth of the sun. While monks chant, they gradually started merging together, but not slick. It was Proton who flew in the sky before Saint Nick. It was Odin, his eight-legged horse name was Sleipnir, and that's how they came up with Santa and reindeer. He's the Celtic holly king and a sleigh as he sees down. Robes traditionally red, holy holly, the wreath crown. Throughout hundreds of generations, tradition passed on, and now the holiday is a retail phenomenon. You spend and all to make the ones you love happy. It's the biggest holiday they have for sheep. They chose the winter solstice as the birth of Jesus Christ, the Savior, the Son of Man, the righteousness, the light. December 25th is not his real date of birth. Pagan holidays disguised, but they came first. Throughout hundreds of generations, tradition passed on, and now the holiday is a retail phenomenon. You spend and all to make the ones you love happy. It's the biggest holiday they have for sheep.
Welcome to Good Vibrations, episode 244. And as I advance through the years, I'm finding myself less and less attuned to the traditional celebrations involved in what in the West is referred to as Christmas, and more of a connectedness with nature, the cycles and rhythms of time, and in particular, the winter solstice. So I never used to care what time of year it was, particularly when I lived a totally nocturnal existence as a DJ going way back, where I would quite happily go to bed at 8 o'clock in the morning in the winter and get up at 4 p.m. just as it was getting dark. But in more recent years, as my knowledge has expanded and I've embraced aspects of my higher self, I've come to really appreciate and revel in the spring and summer months. That's when I truly come alive. So there's something instinctively reassuring about having reached the winter solstice, that midpoint in the season, and the knowledge that we've reached the lowest of points in the sun's annual journey, and that from the 25th of December onwards, in the northern hemisphere at least, the days will now be getting gradually longer, with just a little bit more warmth and daylight returning with every passing day, all the way up to the zenith of the summer solstice. So in this regard, it's not hard for me to comprehend why our ancestors and many different cultures in these parts of the world would wish to revere what's come to be known as Christmas and celebrate it. So Morecambe and Wise, repeats from 1971, and annual reruns of The Sound of Music and Home Alone, It Is Not. Guesting today is the co-founder and current organizer of the annual Glastonbury Symposium in England, and also the author of many books, including the one we'll be homing in on today, Christmas, A Short History from Solstice to Santa. So it's welcome to Andy Thomas. Welcome on, Andy.
Nice to be here. Hello.
And listeners might be interested to know that Andy has a lot to answer for in terms of having given me my first ever UK speaking slot when I decided to stick my head above the parapet all those years ago and go public with my findings on the music industry and such. This was at Changing Times in 2013. So we just passed the 10-year anniversary there. And there's been no looking back for me ever since. So in the words of Pulp, it started there. So thanks very much for that, Andy.
Oh, well, I clearly made a good choice. Look, I've always thought anybody that's got something interesting to say, they should be heard. And, I always try to do that. And still at the Glastonbury Symposium, even now, if there's somebody that might not be a well-known name, but if they've got something that I think should be heard, let's give them a go. It doesn't have to be big names. It's all about the information and somebody having a bit of attitude and something to say. And you very, very clearly had that. And you've done amazing things since.
Yeah, thanks very much. Okay, so let's get into this book then. It's appropriate to the time of year. And let's start with some of the pagan traditions coming out of Northern Europe, because they were all marking the winter solstice and the sun's symbolic death and rebirth that I just mentioned. And there were a number of deities besides Jesus who were said to have been born on the 25th of December, including, I think, Horus, Mithras, Tammuz. What were some of the others, and why, in your research, in your estimation, were they all said to have been born on the 25th of December?
Okay, well, so now I'm going to be a little bit sort of vague here because the 25th of December, let's be clear. Let's go back to the basics of how this works. So the solstice, which is, basically, if you look at our elliptical orbit and the tilt of the planet, which gives us the seasons, if anybody looks it up, you'll suddenly understand why you get a weird thing occur at a solstice, where the sun will come up in exactly the same place for 4 days running. So there'll be a pause. And if anybody here doesn't know, the word solstice is Latin, and it literally means the sun stands still. That's what it means, because that's what it appears to do. Now, that mattered more at the midwinter solstice because, to the ancients, the cycles of the seasons were crucial. It was life and death. And obviously that they weren't stupid, but they realized that, when that sun got stuck for 4 days in the midwinter, when everything was very cold, everything was very dark, it mattered more that you anticipated the first new movement of that, of the sun. So it will come up in exactly the same place for 4 days running, and then it begins to move. Well, the average winter solstice, and it can drift a bit, it's not always the same, but on average, it's 21st of December. So you count 4 days on from 21st of December, and of course you get to 25th of December. And that is why that was a day that was long seen as a time that you would celebrate. You were returning the light. You were welcoming the fact you were seeing the first new movement of the sun. And so that's why that day has been used in many contexts. Now, of course, we call it 25th of December. There's been various calendars over the years, but the same solar day, which is always going to be the same, 4 days after the solstice, that was the day people would then celebrate. So, as you've said, various gods and deities have been associated with that day. But it is a bit vague, I have to say. So I know that we're very fond in the alternative world of saying that, gods like Mithras and, as you mentioned, Horus, were born on 25th of December. There are some arguments that actually it's not quite that specific, but that it was the winter solstice. And it doesn't really matter because it's clearly about celebrating the return of light. And the key Roman festival for the sun god, who was called Sol Invictus, was definitely 25th of December. And of course, when the Romans became Christian, if you look at the depictions of Sol Invictus, some of the early Roman depictions, there's a guy standing there with a halo looking exactly like Jesus would look just a few hundred years later. You can see that all they did was just keep going with the same iconography and then change the context. And there's a Roman calendar in 354 AD that lists all the Roman festivals. And it says, 25th of December is the Roman sun god day. But it also says in that list for the first time, and it represents the birth of Christ of Bethlehem. So there you see, that's the beginning of that day being taken away from the sun god and being given to Jesus. So there's a long crossover here. And absolutely many things have constellated around the winter solstice, but including, of course, the Norse mythology, which I'm sure we're going to get into in a minute, because they had a big winter festival, which we all know, called Yule, and that was all centered also around the winter solstice.
Right. So it seems the more northern you go in Europe, the more they were marking these ceremonies, because that's the regions where the effects of winter were felt the most. So the people were most looking forward to the return of spring, and they marked it with all these different celebrations and traditions. But you find a lot of these concentrated towards the Arctic Circle and very far north in Europe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There is no getting away from the fact that, so although Christmas, as some would call it, and of course now it has lots of names, but it's been exported around the world, there's no escape from the fact that it is all about, it's a northern festival of light in the darkness, warmth in the coldness. There's no getting away from it. And ultimately, Christmas is all based around sun worship, if we're absolutely frank about it. And, any figure with a halo, with the radiance behind their head, it all goes back to sun gods, and especially that Roman sun god we just mentioned, Sol Invictus. So absolutely. So because that day then got used to mark Christmas, because it was a seamless transition from the Roman sun god day. I mean, there's no getting away from it. Of course, then you've got to just accept that, the root of it is in a solstice celebration. As far as we can see, I mean, celebrating the winter solstice goes back forever. There's always been some kind of festival of light somewhere in the world around that time. And I mean, again, you mentioned Horus, so that's interesting. So the birth of Horus was celebrated at the winter solstice. And there's many similarities in the story of the birth of Horus with the nativity story, which of course comes later. And cutting a longer story short, there's kind of a sort of a virgin birth. There's a long and gory story about Osiris, who was the father of Horus, getting split into many different parts. And then without wanting to get too risque here, Isis wanted to conceive, so she managed to find the crucial part of Osiris and then managed to conceive Horus. But then Osiris's brother Set had said, I feel threatened by the power of Horus. I'm going to have him murdered the minute he's born. So when Isis gave birth, she had to do so hidden away and had to keep Horus, basically bringing him up in hiding for many years. And of course, a lot of people have spotted, even in the academic world, well, that is really not dissimilar to what you then get in the nativity story, where, of course, there it is Herod wanting to kill Jesus. And where do Mary and Joseph have to take Jesus to bring him up, to keep him safe from Herod? Egypt, funnily enough. And there's a lot of other Egyptian connections. There's similarities. And then, we've already mentioned Mithras. And again, you got a winter solstice birthday. We can argue about the exact days, but, around that time. And again, effectively a virgin birth. Because he's born out of a rock in a cave, according to legend. So no parents at all there. But, nonetheless, you begin to see this sort of repeating theme going through. And so what we've got today is a really, on one level, bizarre, and on the other level, kind of quite nice mishmash of all these different legends and mythologies. They've all got mixed in together. And here we are still celebrating essentially the same things, because whether you are celebrating literally the return of light as the sun, or the return of light in some kind of godlike form, whether it be Mithras, Horus, or Jesus, it's ultimately the same thing. You pick your metaphor and you work with what's good for you. And I quite like that about Christmas, that you can actually do it in whatever way you want. And when I hear people arguing about what the real meaning of Christmas is, it's kind of irrelevant. It will be what you want it to be. And it has long been many different things down at its core.
Yeah, it's definitely a mishmash of different influences. It's one big melting pot, as you say. It's loaded with symbolism and allegory, depending on which tradition you're drawing from. And as you said, when the control system wants to bring in a new religion, such as Christianity, for example, they find it much easier to build on existing holidays, holy days, which are already there, and sort of twist and shape and mold them towards the belief system that they want the people to have. But it's so much easier to take an occasion which is already there, such as celebrations around the winter solstice. So we had the imposition of Christianity, and I think that happened largely at the hands of the Emperor Constantine. But also we had the imposition of Roman festivals, in particular Saturnalia, which was based around the same time of year. I believe that was a very long festival leading up to what we now call Christmas for several days, involving all kinds of debauchery and hedonism, such was how the Romans liked to get down, and the trading of masters and slaves for a day as part of one of these fun rituals of theirs. So can you tell us a bit more about Saturnalia in particular?
Yeah, to be sure. Well, so it's funny because everybody remembers Saturnalia, but they don't remember the festival that then comes after it, which actually, in a way, is closer to the Christmas we do today, although remnants of Saturnalia have still remained. So Saturnalia, as the name would strongly suggest, it was a celebration of the reign of the god Saturn. Now that's kind of strange because Saturn is seen as a bit of a doer figure. You know, in astrology, Saturn is seen as quite a hard work sort of planet to have if you've got a transit going on. But somehow they associated with the reign of Saturn as a very free and easy time, a time when there weren't strictures, you know, you could more or less do anything. So Saturnalia was a brief revisiting, as they saw it, of this, hey, just do anything you want. And yeah, of course, there was a lot of drinking, Roman orgies, all the rest of it. Although, now that said, it wasn't everybody. A lot of people did actually frown on that at the time, and it's a strange thing. The Romans are an odd mix of great sort of, you know, libertarianism, but also great moralism. Not everybody liked it, but nonetheless, yeah, sure, it went on. But what's interesting is that would be held in mid-December, and that would effectively go on for a week and a bit. But actually, the one that is equally associated with what would then become Christmas was a festival called the Calendar Festival. Now, as you might imagine, we get the word calendar from there, and that began what was called the Roman calend system, and that effectively was a solar new year festival. So that would begin 1st of January and would go on for 3 or 4 days after that. And we have very, very clear descriptions of what they would do at the Calendar Festival. Now, there's a 4th century Roman writer called Libanius, and I'll do this off the top of my head, right? I'm remembering this, but he describes Calendar and he says words to the effect of, everywhere is singing and feasting. The rich enjoy luxury, but the poor also set better food than usual upon their tables. And then there's this great line about the desire to spend money grips everybody. A stream of presents pours itself out on all sides. And it goes on like that. And you read that today and you think, yeah, that could describe modern Christmas. And you realize when you read that quote that, yeah, what we celebrate's changed over the years. What we do really hasn't. And so eventually Saturnalia and Calendar would then mix together with Christmas once, as you say, Constantine took, Christianity to be the new Roman religion. And it merged. And then, of course, it met finally in the Norse mythology, which we mentioned briefly earlier. And that was the Feast of Yule. And Yule is really influential. So if anybody doesn't know, what Yule was all about was, again, a winter solstice celebration. And it was all about the reign of the god Odin, or Woden, depending on what you want to call him. But we'll go with Odin today. And Odin was said each winter solstice to be leading this wild supernatural chase of gods across the sky. Now, we don't know whether this is in memorial of something astronomical or astrological. We don't know where this came from, but there it is, it's there. And as he would lead this chase of gods around the world, he would come down to earth and he would find the good and reward the good. Well, of course, if you can't already guess, that is the first inkling we've got of what will eventually become a Father Christmas stroke Santa Claus figure. It's really rooted in that Norse mythology. And we've taken on a lot of things from Yule, you know, the veneration of evergreens, long before holly and ivy became sacred in the carol to Christians. It was already seen as a sacred plant because it was doing very well in the cold, dark time of the year. There were practices like wassailing, and wassail is Anglo-Saxon and it literally means be in good health. So when you drink your glasses and you say, your health, you are wassailing, basically. All of these things really come from Yule and lots of other things. So what we've got really today is a mishmash of Yule, Saturnalia, Calendar and Christmas. It's quite remarkable how they've all merged together. And then, you'll see some of this coming back. Saturnalia, for instance, would then get re-echoed in a medieval practice that was really huge, but we hardly remember today, and that was called misrule. We could talk about this if you want, but when you hear about a lord of misrule, it comes from a very wild Christmas practice, a lot of drinking, a lot of silliness, a lot of merriment, rather like Saturnalia. So it's funny how it's that kind of thing keeps coming back every now and then throughout history.
Sure. I've also heard claims of so-called magic mushrooms being involved in some of these Norse traditions. And in particular, there's a red and white spotted mushroom, which symbolizes Santa, Father Christmas to some, which apparently made participants feel like they were flying through the sky. Hence the imagery of Santa and his reindeer flying through the sky. Have you come across that one?
Absolutely. So now what's interesting here is, it does cross into Norse mythology, but it seems to be rooted actually in the Sami people. So it's funny, we often say, don't we, Father Christmas, we'll talk more about him in a minute maybe, but we often say he lives at the North Pole. Well, what we can say is there's a people that do live sort of nearish the North Pole called the Sami. And they're reindeer herders, very big on all of that. And they've got this thing, as you say, about what's called the fly agaric mushroom. So these classic red and white things, they grow here as well, because they say if you imbibe it, let's say that, it gives you shamanic experiences. So as you've described, if you imbibe it, it puts you into a different state of mind. So they're not like magic mushrooms. They're much bigger than that. They're huge. I do not recommend in any way picking one and eating one, because if you do, you're going to be violently ill. But what they have to do, and this is a bit disgusting, but it's true. What they do is they let the reindeer eat these things first. And then after they've seen the reindeer eating a lot of the fly agarics, they then drink the reindeer wee-wee, basically.
Nice.
And that is how they imbibe it. And I know, lovely. And by doing that, they then claim that that's the best way to do it. And you could then get these incredible spiritual experiences. You would, wouldn't you? And maybe, yeah, indeed, that's how you might imagine you were indeed flying through the sky with the reindeer.
Instant results, just add reindeer piss. Nice.
Well, yes, if anybody wants to try that at Christmas, do go ahead, but it's not my first choice. But then it's interesting because then you get other shamanic practices. There was an old one where the shaman would climb up the center of the yurt. There would be like a pole in the center of the yurt, and there'd be a fire at the bottom, and then he would climb up onto the roof as part of the kind of winter solstice ceremonies, which of course has almost certainly fed into the legends of Father Christmas coming down the chimney. Because it definitely would seem to relate to that. So yeah, and of course then what is interesting about the fly agaric connection is that it would explain then the celebration of red and white, because the Sami people, because they venerate the fly agaric, they even dress in these red and white kind of robes and put them on when they're doing their ceremonies. And of course in the end you wind up with the red and white Santa Claus, which, by the way, was not invented by Coca-Cola. I know Coca-Cola wants you to believe that. They did popularize their image of him, that is true, in their kind of early 20th century poster campaigns. They didn't invent it. The red and white Santas were already there and almost certainly relates to the Fly Garrex. And then, of course, Coca-Cola realized, oh, hang on a minute, he's wearing the company colors. That's useful. And so, of course, they then adopted it. But they didn't invent it. I've heard that even on Radio 4 saying they did. They didn't. You could prove that. Okay, so let's not give Coca-Cola any more credit than they deserve here. But yeah, all right, they popularized the image of him. But yes, so the colors are interesting. So the red and white then takes over. But if you look at earlier depictions of Father Christmas / Santa Claus, often he's in green or brown, and there's other colors. And there's other colors all around the world. I mean, if you go to Russia or the Slavic nations, you get Grandfather Frost, and he's usually in blue. Now, Odin was said to have worn a blue hood at the winter solstice, so that is probably a direct sort of relation to that. But then there's lots of different Christmas figures all around the world, some of which cross-reference, others seem to come out of the blue. Christmas is very different in every single country, although that's what makes it so interesting, of course.
Sure. So Father Christmas is a hodgepodge of different influences as well. Somehow he's transitioned into Santa Claus, which is the way we spell it here in England, an alarming anagram of Satan Lucas. Lucas being the light bringer, Lucifer. So possibly a dark overtone to the name there. And also Santa Claus is described in some traditions as Saint Nicholas or Saint Nick. And of course, the devil is known as Old Nick. So again, some sort of dark twisting there can give you that. And I wonder whether this old man with the white beard can also be representative of Saturn, again, going back to Saturnalia in the Roman tradition, or Kronos, who is always pictured as an old man with a white beard because he's the keeper of time. He marks the passing of time in this realm. I think it's probably a melting pot of all these different influences, and there's probably some darker elements in there as well as some more fun ones.
I mean, yes, he is absolutely a hybrid figure. I mean, the Satan anagram, I'm not sure that isn't chance. I mean, I can't prove that, but because, okay, so what happens is, so you get distinct figures arrive. So let's just take the British Father Christmas. So he's clearly rooted in the legend of Odin. He is appearing on the front of pamphlets even in the 1600s. We should talk about that in a minute, actually. The radical credentials of Christmas, where Christmas actually got banned for a while. And there was a pamphlet complaining about that. And that shows a very early Father Christmas in the mid-1600s. But then what happens is, so you mentioned St. Nicholas. So St. Nicholas is the saint of children and other things, and he's much, much bigger on the continent than he is here. So if you go to like the Netherlands or Belgium or somewhere like that, they will portray, him as Santa Claus. So St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, Santa Claus. Santa Claus basically is the Spanish variation on it. So is it just chance that it's an anagram? But you're going to have to work that one out for yourself. But yes, clearly, then what happened was that especially the Dutch version of Santa Claus rubs off onto our Father Christmas, who was originally a distinctly different figure. We had a lot to do with Dutch colonists in the Americas for a while, for instance. And so we started to kind of take on aspects of that, and it gradually merged together. But so you mentioned Satan and Saint Nick. And again, is Nicholas and Nick, is that coincidence? I don't know. But, and you'll like this if you don't already know it, what is true is if you go to especially kind of Central European countries, they have a Christmas figure who is Krampus, and he is the Christmas demon. And he is, without any question, portrayed as this utterly demonic figure. And we don't do this here, but it's really big. And if you go to certain countries, so walking behind St. Nicholas or their local variation, there's another one called Belsnickel, by the way, who's a much grumpier version of Father Christmas, yet another version. Walking behind them is this demonic figure, and he's usually wearing chains, and it's obviously somebody dressed up, and they're taunting the crowds. And it's like good and evil together. So it, without any question, it is a very overtly demonic figure. And Krampus was said to steal away any children who were not good over Christmas, which of course was a fantastic way of keeping them all quiet, wasn't it, over Christmas?
Oh, yeah.
And then you see variations on that. So this is now highly controversial, but in the Netherlands, for instance, for many years, and it's beginning to, develop into other ways now, but they have Black Peter. Because Black Peter is this kind of, again, this imp-like, rather mischievous figure who would do nasty things to the children who were not good over Christmas. And, he would burst into Christmas parties and terrorize the children, even while St. Nicholas was standing there. But of course, it's controversial now because traditionally that was done in blackface. And there's many arguments because some are saying, well, he was originally the Moorish slave of St. Nicholas. Others say, no, he wasn't. The reason he was black was that he was sooty because he came up and down the chimneys. But whichever way you look at it, so I went out to the Netherlands and did their Christmas there one year, which there, the big days are 5th and 6th of December. There's many variations on that. Some countries even wait for the Epiphany in January to do it all. But anyway, we went there. And there's all these gollywogs hanging out and everything. We were really shocked. That is now the object of a lot of protests. I don't know what the solution is now, but at one point they were doing Rainbow Peter and putting him into all kinds of different colors, or maybe they've just dropped that completely. But when they tried to change it, I know there was a big controversy in the Netherlands. But anyway, what I'm saying here is that all of this meets in the middle. And we've eliminated the dark side of Christmas here. So we took Father Christmas, merged him with a bit of Santa Claus, and then created this jollier, more magical fellow. But certainly in many parts of the world, there's this kind of the two sides, the good and the evil. If you go to Italy, you get Befana, who is a rare female character who goes around whacking people with their broomstick, So we've sweetened it here, but it's not quite like that everywhere around the world.
Sure. I'm sure Rainbow Peter will be a thing somewhere in this time.
Well, yes. If only because they don't want to stop, the traditions. So they're going to have to find a way. But I don't know where it's at today. But yeah, certainly, it's caused a lot of fuss.
Cultural Marxist Christmas. So there are many rituals that people partake in at this time of year, and they probably don't really give any thought as to why they're doing it and what the origins were and what the symbolic meaning is. Why, for example, do people kiss under the mistletoe, if we just focus in on that one?
Well, again, some of what we do at Christmas is really shrouded in mystery. I mean, one book, obviously I'd recommend my own book, but one book I really would recommend if anybody wants to really get into the fine detail. It's very long and very detailed and tiny print, but it will tell you everything you need to know about any Christmas tradition and many other folklore traditions, is Professor Ronald Hutton's book, The Stations of the Sun. I cannot recommend it enough. That is the go-to, the scholarly work that is, and the unbelievable detail in it about where all these things come from. It'll blow your mind. But even he accepts that kissing under the mistletoe is really vague. Now, if you read these kind of color supplement type annual features about where Christmas traditions come from, I think they make them up half the time. Because I read somewhere it's an old druidic ceremony. Well, yeah, okay, so Druids would offer a sprig of mistletoe as a sign of love and friendship. And there's a lot of interesting things about the symbolism of mistletoe. I mean, in fact, I've got to tell you this, the actual definition of the word mistletoe is a translation, and it literally means poo on a stick. Well, it's going to make it a bit less romantic, isn't it?
Nice.
But of course, other people have pointed out that if you mash up some mistletoe berries, it looks a bit like human semen. Sorry, it's not very Christmassy, I know, but this is where it's all rooted. But then you read all these things about, the Druids did this, that, and the other. Honestly, there's no evidence for kissing under it at all. So the earliest record we have of anybody kissing under the mistletoe is, in fact, in the 1700s, and that was here in England. So it was probably more of a local thing that then spread around, but nobody really knows entirely where it comes from. So again, probably because of the representation of what mistletoe was seen to mean. it's kind of like come down to us through various means. But the actual kissing under it, I imagine it was just a drunken thing which erupted one Christmas and then it's kind of stuck. But there's no definite resource to tell us where that comes from, annoyingly.
Right. And the keeping of trees in our homes, which is quite a strange thing when you think about it, having a tree in your house for a few weeks, molting needles everywhere, and the giving of gifts under the tree. What are some of the symbolic overtones of those two traditions?
Sure. So, again, like we mentioned briefly, evergreens. So the celebration of nature and light returning to nature, again, is at the core of this. So, if you'd bring in sort of like holly and ivy and things into your home environment and then decorate your environment with it, what you were doing was invoking that resilience of nature. You hoped then that it would pass to you. So, that's been around for a long time. Decorating an actual full-scale tree at the winter solstice, I mean, that also does go back a long way. There's records of Turkish people doing this thousands of years ago. And again, there are records of druids dressing trees at the winter solstice. The first proper Christmas tree is said to have been invented by Martin Luther, who kind of helped kickstart the whole Protestant Reformation in the 1500s. Now, it's said that he wanted to show his children the wonder of like the universe around him that God had created, and he was inspired by seeing the stars on a walk home one night, and he wanted to bring that somehow into the home. So he got this fir tree and then put candles on the tree, rather dangerously, of course, but to show his children that you could have this also in your home environment. So that's the first known one. And then trees at Christmas then begin to pop up more and more on record. I know everybody credits Prince Albert with creating a Christmas tree, but that isn't true. But he did help popularize it. So when Prince Albert married Queen Victoria, of course, he brought with him many of the Germanic traditions that have faded away here. So we really should mention in a moment, Christmas got banned here. It got banned. We should talk about that in a minute. But then even after it got restored, a lot of people were reluctant to do it, but he kind of said, no, let's go for it. And in Germany, they hadn't lost their Christmas traditions. So he then started to have trees at the palace regularly, and the front of the Illustrated London News in 1848, which was actually a year of great revolution across Europe. But here we were in Britain talking about Christmas trees, and the front cover showed their tree at the palace, and that was the one that really set the trend. And soon everybody wanted a Christmas tree, and it would take off from there. There was a brief lull in the First World War where trees were associated with the Germans for a while, and so they kind of backed off a bit. But now, of course, it is the central statement that you are doing Christmas, so that's really had legs. But so they have been around for a very long time, but it's not until that mid-Victorian period where the tree becomes the central icon. And they were resisted for a long while by some. I mean, it's worth mentioning here that like the Vatican would not have a Christmas tree in St. Peter's Square until 1982. It was only Pope John Paul II that finally decided they would, because so many people saw it as a complete pagan intervention. They didn't like it, but finally he said, no, look, it's all right, we'll have a tree. So, but yeah, I mean, there has been a lot of resistance. There's been a lot of arguing over Christmas trees. I mean, South Korea once put up a kind of weird metallic Christmas tree right on the border with North Korea, and North Korea threatened to blow it up because they said it was a symbol of something like madcap confrontation. I mean, you have to laugh at some of this stuff. Oh. But yeah, Christmas trees are always controversial. I mean, just this year, some of you might have seen on the news in Spain, this is very un-Christmassy. There's massive disputes between different Spanish cities about who's got the tallest Christmas tree. And when it turned out one city was doing better than the other, the mayor of the other city then demanded that they raise their tree up on a lifter. I mean, it's just utterly insane and completely not in the spirit of Christmas. But there we are.
Yeah, well, it's an insane world, Andy. You may have noticed.
It is, yes, it is, totally.
So why did Christmas get banned then?
Okay, so listen, various countries have banned Christmas over the years. So China famously, Russia banned it. although it then came back as a New Year's Eve festival. So when they had the communist revolution, obviously all Christianity, all of that was out. By popular demand, they had to bring it back in 1935, but they turned it into a New Year's celebration. And instead of all the Christmassy stuff, they'd have the red star on the top and then things like sort of very Russian communist symbols hanging from it. But yeah, North Korea banned it, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, various countries have tried to scrap it. But of all countries, we here, England, we did the biggest job on it. So cutting a longer story short, we had the rise of the Puritans, of course. Now, they began really in the 1500s. They were very strict Protestants. If you don't know what they stood for, anyone listening, they believed you should only do that which is in the Bible. If it isn't in Scripture, you don't do it. So they didn't like Christmas, number one, because there is no date given for Christmas in the Bible. And they also knew it was an old pagan date that had got reused, the sun god festival. So they had already declared Christmas a heresy. But they also didn't like it, all the immorality that it led to, cross-dressing, mummery, all of that, which would eventually lead to the pantomimes that we have today, still going in a weird way. They didn't like, what they saw as immoral practices and gambling and all of this. So they wanted to ban Christmas. Now, it didn't matter when they were a side movement, but then when we got to the 1640s and we got into the English civil wars, which were very long and bloody and not very nice, of course, we wound up under the rule of the arch-Puritan Oliver Cromwell eventually. And once they defeated Charles I, and eventually, of course, he would get executed, the Puritan Republic that was now running England could do anything it wanted, and it did. And in 1647, it actually banned Christmas. It described it as a sacrilege, it described it as a satanical practice, and you could now go to jail for doing Christmas. And it's crazy, really. I mean, when you look at it, what's interesting to me is because I know some people today don't like Christmas because they say, it's opium for the people and it's all a distraction. I kind of think it's the opposite. Authorities have long felt threatened by Christmas and they've long wanted to get rid of it because of kind of this freeing of the spirit that you can get from it if you're doing it in the right way. Anyway, so yeah, no, the Puritans were terrible. They would patrol the streets trying to make sure that you weren't doing Christmas. There's even accounts of soldiers having to sniff the air to make sure you weren't making Christmas food. A lot of people didn't like this. There were riots in London at Cornhill and in Canterbury and Kent. From people trying to have Christmas not being allowed. And we mentioned earlier, there were protest pamphlets. There's a famous one called The Vindication of Christmas, saying that this goes too far. And you couldn't even practice your Christian faith anymore. You weren't allowed to go to church, which, you might think is a good thing today, but back then that was a really serious issue. And a lot of people did want to go to church, and you couldn't sing carols. Presbyterians described carols as filthy. That's the world that we were living in at that point. So in the end, though, there was such a pushback against this. Nobody really wanted to lose their Christmas. The Scots had already lost their Christmas in the 1500s. The Calvinistic preacher John Knox had scrapped it as early, I think it was 1583, he got rid of it. But of course, what did they do? They just reinvented it, didn't they? So they then elevated Hogmanay, and eventually Burns Night comes along. So that just goes to prove if you take something away that people want, they'll only recreate it anyway. And in the end, what was happening here was that there was a pushback. People started to see how much they could get away with. And when Oliver Cromwell died, of course, that changed everything. So he died in whenever it was, I think 1658, and nobody knew what to do. And in all the chaos that followed, we restored the monarchy. So we'd got rid of Charles I, had him executed, but then we restored the monarchy. And Christmas then came back because Charles II, who came onto the throne, was a big fan of Christmas. And he liked misrule, and he liked all the silliness and all the mummery and all the rest of it. So it was then officially sanctioned again. But it would actually take a long time to come back to full strength because things like the Industrial Revolution came along that pulled people into cities and factories and away from the old country Christmas traditions. And they didn't have time to celebrate, couldn't turn off the furnaces, had to keep the machinery running. And I think there was a period between 1788 and 1835 where the Times, which was the big newspaper back then, managed to have 20 Christmas Day editions that didn't even mention Christmas. So, you know, that's how faded away it was. And that was in those times. And eventually it would come back. So people like Prince Albert helped. There was a rise of a high Anglican movement called the Oxford movement in the 1800s. They believed that we should celebrate the ceremonies and all the festivals, and you know they elevated Christmas there. And eventually it would come back. But I think we all forget that we did nearly lose Christmas. And I mean, like the Pilgrim Fathers, when they went over to America, they refused to do Christmas from the start. So to begin with, American settlers never did Christmas. That would eventually change. But so, yeah, it's a funny thing. A lot of people have tried to stamp Christmas out, and yet it always comes back, which I find intriguing. And that's how I always think that if you took it away again, because I know some people would love there not to be Christmas even now. But if you did, we'd only reinvent it. Because I think you need that annual celebration of light in the darkness. And I think you need that sense of letting go at least once a year, you know. So yeah, there's different ways of doing it. And the commercialization is obviously very annoying, but if you can cut through that, I think it does still have a value, you know, even now.
Always good to see public pushback change things in society. And I see King Charles, I just can't take that title seriously, has scrapped the idea of doing these Christmas messages at 3 o'clock on Christmas Day. You know, his mother did it for decade after decade after decade, and it was every TV channel, 3 p.m. Christmas Day, her annual message. They don't bother with that anymore. So that's the end of an institution, which many people will be happy about, I guess. So a sign of changing times.
I hadn't actually heard that. I mean, I thought he was going to do. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't do something.
Well, I've looked at the TV listings, and there's
Yeah.
nothing on Christmas Day to say that they're going to be broadcasting his message.
How
the way they
bizarre.
used
Okay,
to.
well, let's see. I'll be really surprised if he doesn't, because I think people, for some reason, cherish that. Now, I don't know about you, but obviously I'm imagining you're not a big pro-monarchist, but
Not the biggest fan, no.
not the biggest fan. I never thought the Queen had anything much to say. I'd always think, God, look, you've got this 5 minutes. Why didn't you say something really profound? But it never really was.
Pretty
was
sure it was all script writers and aides that were doing it for her anyway.
God, yeah, I'm sure. So listen, well, let's see what he does. If he did, I'd actually quite like him to break ranks and actually say something that matters. I know there was a brief time, I think Channel 4 used to do the alternative Christmas message, and that actually get people with opinion. Yeah, I mean, it was, sometimes it was all very woke, but yeah, it was, well, in terms of the monarchy, I mean, they have often directed Christmas. I should say that. I mean, here's one you might like. We're back in the Norse age. King Haakon, I think, I'm guessing in Norway, actually passed a law where you had to drink ale at Christmas. It was illegal not to drink ale at Christmas. So some people might like that law, but I think that one might have lapsed a bit now. But the monarchy has often set Christmas, and then, as we mentioned, Prince Albert's tree and that. King Charles today, let's call him that, I suppose that's what he is. I mean, he's already been accused of not actually being very active. A lot of people thought he was going to be doing lots of tours and that, and actually he's been very quiet. So if he wants to earn his money, he'd better start doing something soon. So if he doesn't do the Christmas message, I would imagine that would be quite frowned on.
He might get stuck up in the mountains at Davos because he hangs out there a lot, I've noticed, with Klaus Schwab and them.
Oh, no. Maybe we'll get the Great Reset Christmas.
Nice.
Yeah, well, God knows what they've got in mind for future Christmases. But
yes. I think I can probably guess some of it. So we rarely, if ever, hear of things happening the other way round. So those in the southern hemisphere, so-called antipodes, celebrating a reversal of the sun's cycle in their part of the world around the 25th of June. So that day is considered anti-Christmas by Satanists who like to invert everything. So they take the Christmas that we celebrate and turn it on its head, and then celebrate it 6 months later when the sun is beginning to symbolically die in the sky and sort of get a little bit lower with every passing day. So they like to celebrate darkness and death. So they've got anti-Christmas on the 25th of June, which was interestingly the day on which George Michael was born and Michael Jackson died. And they were both prominent recording artist for Sony, who both got into some legal issues with their record label. Didn't end well for either of them. And then George Michael died 6 months later on Christmas Day of 2016. So we have a man possibly most famous for the song Last Christmas I Gave You My Heart, turning up dead on Christmas Day of heart failure. What were the chances? We're into my sort of work here, as you can tell. And we've also had the recent death of Shane MacGowan, best known for the song Fairy Tale of New York with the Pogues, of course, who was born on Christmas Day. So crazy synchronicities. But just going back to the idea of folk in, let's say, Australia, for example, they don't really celebrate their Christmas or their winter solstice in June, unless I've missed something.
I mean, obviously, it's not technically quite the same down there. I mean, I don't know how the mechanics of it works, below the equator. But so what's interesting is, I mean, yes, I mean, you mentioned the anti-Christmas, but there's another more celebratory Christmas that especially English people would have in midsummer, because, of course, Christmas on the beach in blinding hot sunshine has always been a bit weird. My wife Helen lived in Australia for several years. And she said Christmas was always weird. People would still put up Christmas trees and fake snow, and they're melting, So what a lot of them would do is what got nicknamed Pommy Christmas, which is kind of like goes along probably with anti-Christmas, but it was pro-Christmas. But they would have that in the Australian winter, just for a laugh, right. I think, as much as anything else. I mean, we should say that there are many different celebrations around the world. I mean, you can go, is it the Bahamas have Junkanoo, I think, and they paint palm trees and things like this. There's many variations on it. But for some reason, the winter solstice is a much bigger thing than anybody in the Southern Hemisphere celebrating their solstice. I don't know why that should be. Maybe there's just less people down there. It's never got established. But yeah, definitely, we've already mentioned Christmas is firmly rooted in that Northern Hemisphere festival without any question at all. But, I should say that there's so many variations on the way people do Christmas. We've talked about a few today. There is no universal Christmas. I mean, there just isn't. And we all like to think everybody sits there with their Christmas crackers and does it the same. I mean, you go outside of British territory, for instance, and ask for a Christmas cracker, you'll get a very funny look. It isn't universal, but it's fine because they do loads of things that we don't do over here. Everywhere's got their own plants they celebrate at Christmas, and obviously that would depend on the climate they're in. And the Greeks often decorate masts of yachts and ships at Christmas rather than trees. So there's all kinds of different ways of doing it. But what I always find intriguing is that thing of wherever you are, even whatever their religion, everybody comes back to needing that festival of light. And you've got Diwali, which is a little bit earlier than the winter solstice, of course, but it's the same thing. And then you've got Hanukkah, and you name it. There are so many different things around the world. And I do think in a world, as we all know, can be pretty dark sometimes. I do think there is a need just to stop and celebrate light in its purest form and in whatever way works for you, at least once a year. And I'm very heartened that it has survived because of that. And people can pick whatever metaphor they want. I don't really mind. But if you're celebrating light as a kind of a pushback against the endless darkness that is torrenting towards us, and indeed we are fed, I think it's a good thing. And therefore, I would always defend the existence of Christmas, Yule, holiday season, whatever you want to call it, because I think it does serve a purpose. And I think that is why, again, so many regimes have tried to stop it. And that's always encouraging. If they want to stop it, it is something you should be doing.
Sure, I'd agree with that. So you've written a whole bunch of books on alternative subjects. What inspired this one in particular? Why did you want to take a deep dive into the origins of Christmas?
Yeah, so there's two sides to what I do, and this has always been. So I know I'm sort of known for doing, conspiracies, crop circles, unexplained mystery type stuff. And yes, that's a massive thing for me, and freedom of expression. I'm not as extreme as some would perhaps like me to be, but I try always to keep avenues open that people should have the right to believe what they want to believe and to say it. right? I might not agree with them, but I'll always defend their right to say it. This crazy world we're in now, where you're not allowed to say anything, or you're taken off of YouTube in 5 minutes for saying the wrong keyword. This is a very foolish world. So that's one side. The other side, though, I've always loved folklore and history. And I grew up in Lewes in East Sussex, which is steeped in folklore. So it's very well known for its bonfire night festivities. Got some of the biggest things it is the biggest bonfire night celebration in the world. And I think that really rubbed off onto me. And of course, that's rooted in a conspiracy that was about, celebrating the deliverance from the gunpowder plot conspiracy. So I think that really triggered a lot of things. Plus Thomas Paine, this big kind of rights campaigner. I know not everybody likes him, and he's a very kind of mixed character, but he lived in Lewes for a while, and there's lots of things about fighting for your rights and rights of man, freedom of speech. I think it did all rub off on me. So going back to where that all came from and understanding, like, why are they doing bonfire night? What's the religious strife at the roots of this and all of that? It just always fascinated me. And by default, Christmas, I never want to do something just out of habit. If I'm doing something, I want to know why I'm doing it and where it comes from. And I grew up in a very normal, average, semi-detached house with a very normal, average, lower middle class family. And they did Christmas, and it was a big thing. And my father, every Christmas, the week before Christmas, would read A Christmas Carol to me, by Dickens, of course. Which, by the way, if you've never read it, everybody should read it. It is a really amazing book. I know it's been over-adapted, and we all remember Muppets doing it and so on, but strip all that away and go back to the book. It's deeply atmospheric, very moving. It's pretty grim stuff. I mean, it's social comment, and it's a ghost story. But it fascinated me, and every year my father would read it. And yeah, just from there, I always thought, long before I wrote a book about anything else, I'd really like to get to the bottom of this. And it's funny, I'd long had a vision of a book that would somehow get beyond the surface of Christmas. Because I just thought, I hated all the commercialization, like many people do, but I could see there was something real under there that still mattered. And actually, that was one of the first things. I had no idea how I would do it. And then when I started getting books published about, the mystery realms, it just fell into my lap. And I was giving talks about folklore, and I started to talk about Christmas. And then people thought, that's really interesting. Can you do a bit more about that? And I wound up giving a whole talk about the history of Christmas, talking about the things we're talking about here today. But with absolutely the aim of trying to strip away the crap and get down to what matters here. Let's get down to what really matters, and doing a lot about the solstice. And by the way, there's other things about the nativity story that got ancient connections. The three kings may well have an Egyptian connection, and stars and all of that. I don't know how long we've got, but that's a whole other thing. So I've been talking about this for years, and then the opportunity came up, and someone said, well, could you put that into a book? And I thought, yes, actually. So I did. And so there's various versions of it. There's the original British edition, which probably is the purest edition in terms of my vision for it. And then there's a global edition, there's Spanish. There's various versions of it out there. The global edition's a bit more global for obvious reasons. I've got to sell it. So I had to go back and do a bit more research into other countries. But yeah, so the book's out there in one form or another. And I'm glad that it is, because a lot of people who have read it have said, my God, I never knew that. I just kind of did Christmas every year, and it was all very, here we go. And it's reconnected people to what really matters. And it is about the fact that it is radical, that it is about celebrating light, and that it is a tonic to all, the awful stuff that's constantly going on. And I do think there is a kind of campaign's a wrong word, but there's certainly a bent of taking us down in our vibrations with everything that we're fed and all the control agendas. And if you do Christmas right, it does balance that. I don't believe we are being mind controlled to do Christmas. I think it's the other way around. And so I'm always emphasizing that use this time, use this to do something positive with it. And that's where it's at. And so each November and December now, I spend a lot of time out on the road giving Christmas talks, because obviously you can't do it any other time of the year. And just trying to inspire people and just spread the word that, look, if you're going to do this, make something of it, use it for the good,
Yep. Okay. So you're also the co-organizer or curator of the Glastonbury Symposium. So we got the 2024 one coming up last weekend in July, as ever. Can you give any teasers as to what might be going down at that one, or are you keeping that under wraps until late January?
We are keeping under wraps. Yes, so for those that don't know, the Glastonbury Symposium will have been running for 34 years this year, so we've managed to survive. And I'm glad to say, like post-COVID, because we had to stop for a couple of years, did online stuff. That was all very controversial, but we didn't think we could do it justice any other way. But then when we came back, it kind of really hit back to full strength very quickly. I'm really pleased to say. So we're very invigorated by that. And I think because there is so much suppression now, especially online, I think gatherings where people come together and actually, strengthen themselves with community is even more important. It's great. We've got, the Uprise and Shine events, all of this. And so the Glastonbury Symposium has actually found a kind of a new place again. And I feel a duty to keep it going and keep it strong. And so each year we look at what's going on, what matters, and we try and hit the zeitgeist as much as possible of look what's happening now. I mean, you can't always get the speakers you want. There's people I'd love to get, and for one reason or another, you can't always pin them down. And some, of course, they look at us and think, God, you're all a bunch of weirdos. But we always manage to get this really strong lineup, and I'm trying to do that now as I'm in communication with a lot of people at the moment. I can't say yet, but and we'll be back 26th to the 28th of July at Glastonbury Town Hall, where we've been for many years. And I'm very proud to be associated with it. I didn't begin it. It was begun by a guy called Roland Pargeter. And I came in 2 or 3 years after and began to help him. And then before you knew it, I wound up with it in my lap, running it. But, there's the whole team of people that I work with. Without them, it wouldn't happen. And yeah, when I look at the stupid censorship and the suppression, it makes me all the more determined to do the symposium and keep it alive for as long as we can, because the world needs anything like that. The other side must be spoken. And like anywhere now, we've had some controversy. We had some complaints a couple of years ago from the Green lobby. They didn't like some of the comments they'd heard at the symposium. They paid for a ticket and then slagged us off in the local press, saying we shouldn't be allowed. And what was incredible was what was incredible was that the article actually likened us to the Ku Klux Klan. It said, well, you wouldn't let the Ku Klux Klan have a conference, would you? So why are you letting these people? And you think, whoa, that is a ridiculous association to make. We've never been racist. We've never gone down the far right thing. We try to embrace all views, but that's what they had to do. So to try to denigrate us, they had to kind of associate us with something that is completely false. And luckily, the paper in question did actually print our riposte to that, and we vigorously defended ourselves. And then they did at least say that the guy who wrote that, they wouldn't be publishing any more of his stuff because it was so out of order. But it tells you something. You say the wrong opinion now, by God, someone's going to try and stop you, even if they have to resort to force measures to do it. So it makes me all the more determined the Glastonbury Symposium will go on. And people like yourself, you've been there several times over the years, with amazing things to say, incredibly important opinions that should be heard. And this world we're in now, where everything must be closed down, if that's the future, we're all in trouble. So we've got this little conduit. And by the way, if anybody wants to have a look, we've just released, at least for a limited time, all of this year's speakers to watch currently on YouTube, except for Richard Phobes, who has to be on Rumble because he was too controversial. We know YouTube will take us down immediately. If you go to the Glastonbury Symposium website, glastonburysymposium.co.uk, just click on social media. It'll take you to the YouTube channel, and you'll see there's tons of stuff. And actually, Mark, we've discovered a few that have we don't know why, they'd somehow come offline. Maybe somebody took them offline. We put them back, and your presentation from a few years ago has just gone up, just literally in the last 2 or 3 days. So have a look at that. So And again, there's time, so it lives on in that way. A lot of them do get shown around the world in various means online. So again, it's just trying to keep it out there. We're in this constant tussle with YouTube. They're taking down our videos every other week now. Because we have apparently violated their policy. You never quite find out what it is.
Where is that badge of honour?
Well, I know what it is about Giovanna, but it's still annoying. And sometimes it's just over the most pathetic things. You can't even see why they took it off. So, but anyway, that's the game we're in. But we keep putting it out there and hope that it will stick in the end for the people that matter and the people with open eyes and open ears.
Sure. And in terms of your other books and your various talks, because I think you're a bit like me, I've got 5 or 6 different talks ready to go, and I just present whichever one suits whichever group I'm speaking to. I know you have the same. So where can people access the rest of your work and just get in touch with you generally? You've got a website for that, right?
Sure, yeah. If anybody wants to have a look, there's loads of videos of talks and stuff up there. Go to truthagenda.org. truthagenda.org, and you can find out what I'm getting up to. The current book is still The New Heretics, and I think the title of The New Heretics says everything. Again, it's about defending people's rights to believe what they want to believe and trying to just cut through the polarization, which is really just so severe at the moment. But yeah, have a look around. There's articles there that you find out what I'm getting up to, but lots of things to read and to watch. So that's truthagenda.org. And currently, I'm just about to start work on a new book. It won't be out for a little while yet, but it will be going back. The sneak preview is this, going back more to my sort of paranormal roots, because I do feel that that is also something that has not been given the credit it deserves. But now we're living in a world where even the US military is accepting that there is something weird flying around, UAPs and all of that. And, there seems to be more of a growing awareness again that actually weird stuff is going on. It feels like the right time to try to encapsulate some of this. So that's really my project for the year ahead. And then hopefully in due course, we will say more about that when it comes.
Sure. Well, Andy, I would like to wish you a happy Christmas, which is a phrase that not everyone listening to these shows sort of resonates with anymore. But either way, have a great time of the season, and thanks for coming on the show today. Much appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us.
Been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know.
Catch me at the North Pole, living with the Inuits. Sealskin hoodie, hunting St. Nicholas. European holidays and niggas so ignorant. Got Prancer and Blitzens heads mounted in my kitchen, bitch. My uncle family, Jehovah's Witnesses. As kids we thought they was crazy for not celebrating shit. Went to college, learned Christmas is ridiculous. Pagan holidays, ain't no Christ in it. Cause a holiday means a holy day. And December 25th was the birth of the god Saturn. Ancient Romans would celebrate. The upper class worship Mithra, the god of the uncontrollable sun, and that's Christmas. In the Western Hemisphere, December 22nd is the shortest day and longest night of the year. Wanes for 3 days, hence the sun dies. The sun resurrects December 25. So the S-U-N is the son of God. The man-made religion, metaphorical son of God. Named him Omni-Ray, named him Saturn, named him Mithra, named him Christ, the same pattern. Ancient astrology, the Egyptians wrote this. Scientifically put, it's the winter solstice. And after the Catholic Church came to power, they absorbed festivals already popular. In the slave days, they gave us as gifts. Fuck, bound us in metal chains and they whipped us. Went to church and smiled right after they lynched us. You still a fucking slave if you celebrate Christmas.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know.
Jet, jet, jet. Snow in Bethlehem is rare as fuck. Ain't no evergreens and reindeer, y'all is nuts. The history of Christmas is a mix of customs from pagans. Y'all clowns just decorating Satan. The Yule tree was first decorated in the 16th century in Livonia and Germany. In Northern Europe, the Druids during winter nights kept evergreens as a symbol of everlasting life. Vikings in Scandinavia went a little farther, thought of the special planet the sun god Balder. The Germanic tribes worshipped Odin, rode a flying white horse. Original Santa Claus rode one, of course. And the Dutch called him Sinterklaas. His sidekick a demon named the Krampus. Bad children kill a dog. Santa Claus myth combined with Saint Nick, a 4th century Greek bishop who gave gifts. Said he liberated an Ethiopian from a slave ship, who was so grateful he became his servant. It's so racist. The boy called Peter. The origin of the elves is so fiendish. Black Peter in English, Zwart Piet in Swedish. Why do you need this? Look it up if you don't believe it. And even till this day in the Netherlands, they still dress up in blackface. Now go to bed again. Listen, I respect fact over faith. The Catholic Church pays its celebrations on pagan dates. Culturally, every European participates. Then after the pilgrims immigrate to the United States, all those European customs assimilate, forcibly imposed on every other race. New York City was first colonized by the Dutch fam. It was called New Amsterdam. Now I see a lot of sinners in dementia, worshiping 70-foot trees in Rockefeller Center. Stupid if you ain't Viking or a Druid. If you Christian and or black, you are fucking foolish. I seen Miracle on 42nd Street. Wasn't no Asians or Latinos, you disrespected me. Mental genocide is black lost. I'm just being real, this is fact from Jack Frost. Iconoclast. You know what it is. Listen, man. We live in a country where 1% of the population controls 99% of the wealth. Where a black president kisses corporate American ass. Not one single criminal Wall Street banker spent a day in prison, but they'll arrest 5,000 peaceful Occupy Wall Street protesters. We in the biggest recession since the Great Depression. But y'all throw y'all fucking money away. 5.3 billion on Black Friday. You're not just a stupid consumer. That's not capitalism. That's a slave mentality.